Hello and welcome to Beyond the Paradigm. This is part two of the interview with popular author Gary Wayne, in which we discuss the Lord of the Rings movies. We discuss in particular in this episode the symbolism contained within Lord of the Rings and also the creatures within Lord of the Rings. If you enjoy this episode and want to see more content like this, could you please first of all like the episode? You can also share the episode with friends and family. And finally, please subscribe to the channel. I bet when people tuned into this and they think, what is going on here? I wanted to listen to him just talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings. Well, we're going to go deep on this, guys. As you can hear what Gary's saying there. I mean, it's mind-blowing, the connections, but the reality is entertainment isn't just purely entertainment. There's a message and there's a reason behind it. And this Lord of the Rings, obviously, we're talking about, like, you mentioned Psalm 82, this Council of the Gods, and in the Lord of the Rings, they call it the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yep.
But where does the idea of this one ring of power come from? Because as I can remember off the top of my head, there's like, I think 9 rings given to men, 7 to dwarves, 3 to elves, and then there's this like one ring to rule all rings. Where does that idea spring from?
Have these assembly of rings for different groups of people in Lord of the
Yeah, so
Rings.
you've so
I'm
you've
going to
got
count
so
the
you've
different
got
groups of people.
so you've just got men,
That's one,
and then you've got dwarves,
two,
and then you've got elves,
three,
and then there's the one ring of power, which I believe Sauron gets.
four. Yeah.
But that's,
And
I
then,
mean, that's what I've got written down. But and
yeah,
then there's, but what I don't, so there's
typically it's,
Celebrimbor as
typically it's,
well.
typically it's five as I'll count
Well, I
them,
was
but
going to say that
yeah,
I think Celebrimbor, the Lord of Eregion, I believe he makes. I don't know whether he makes some more rings because there's a series, The Ring of Power, on
yeah,
Netflix. So maybe that's then the fifth sort of column.
yeah, it is. So different sort of species and beings
Yeah.
and five continents and five Olympic rings showing this world unity and organizational structure.
Yes. I read something on this and the colors as well.
Yeah, and everything in the Olympic imagery, and I understand the Olympics go back to the Greek history
Mm. Mm.
of, the games of the giants, right? So, and they were awarded laurel wreaths, which are kind of like a thorny crown, but it's in the Greek and Roman understanding is these are the crowns that were also worn by the gods and also by the rulers and the kings. So these are very special from the Lorraine laurel tree, and Lorraine is very important within the occult as well. So, but just understand that these are just subtle things, and they're going to run very deep with these meanings and these groups of beings within the hierarchy. And so, you have this high hierarchy, and then you have the invisible ones that are a hierarchy as well. But it'll be the same thing on earth as it is in heaven, and same thing that goes with the occult with the same type of expression there. So, yeah, so let's look at we've got different types of beings there, and they
Yeah.
have
Well,
their own kings,
mm,
their own royalty. And these are beings that are being represented as groups of beings that lived before the flood.
mm. Well, I mean, like we talked about Iluvatar, and apparently, like he obviously created men and
Yep.
elves, and men are apparently his favorite,
Yeah, apparently.
apparently.
Yeah.
And then Sauron is one of these Maiar, which have sort of um, two
He's
sort of
the
subset groups. There's like the Valar, isn't there? And the Inor, is it the Ainur?
yeah,
And I think that,
he's the leader of the Sarari wizards, and it's a special group of high level wizards, but these are
hmm,
understood as priests. But the thing is they're also depicted in a lot of cultures as hybrid giant human priests. So they would be very much akin to the Cainites before the flood, who Enoch, son of Cain, is going to create the mystical religion of the Enochian Sun and Bull cult and create this initiatory religion that's going to develop and contain all of this knowledge that these wizards sort of control. But Saruman's kind of interesting as well, as we get sorrow or sour, which is the last half of the word dinosaur, that used to be called a dragon, right? And
Yeah.
also we get an interesting version of a human, not a human, but a being in the book of Genesis that is, we understand as the serpent. And this is one that is deceiving Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and working somehow with Satan to bring humankind down. And what's interesting about that, that's the Hebrew word nahash, meaning just that, a serpent. But we remember the serpent as we see it today, not what it was before Eden, which was a walking, talking, intelligent being. And the source word for Nahash is spelled the same way, Nachash in Hebrew, with the vowels in it. And it means sorcerer, wizard, necromancer, same
Mm.
thing as the antediluvian priest. So this seems to be a being that was working as priests even before Adam and Eve were created, because it's already in that position, and it's a beast of the field. So it's created on day six, but seemingly, but in the order of day six before humankind as part of the beasts of the field. And so it seems to be this is a reflection back on that type of being, which is a reptilian type of being, even at that stage, which is dragon-like, which would be a preferred being of the seraphim angels, which are serpent-faced, six-winged dragon angels or serpentine angels. And that these were the ones that were the sons of God for the most part that created the giants. And initially, even the giants would look more serpentine-like before the flood, just as they're depicted as serpents with antediluvian statues and things. And then they lose that look with the giants that show up after the flood because of the intermarriage that's going to go down. So you have more that's part of their history that is being reflected in the leader of these wizards, which suggests maybe a proto-Cainite set of priests that they're reflecting into that imagery. Again, I'm not part of these societies or the Royale, so I can only go so deep. But other names that show up, just if we want to just, I mean, they all mean or have reflections of some of these beings and imageries, like, Gandalf has elf in it. Aragon is a bloodline of a high level of bloodline that's associated with the King of Jerusalem title and the Bourbon family in an intermarriage into the Anjou and the Habsburg family. Aragon is a very important royal bloodline that's in there. You have Elrond, where you have L in there, you have Bergil, IL. So these transliterations are used quite a bit. And typically, when you have an EL for a being that is not of the physical world, that would be a fallen angel or a loyal angel. So, like Azazel as a fallen angel, Michael as a loyal angel. So, these things are interwoven into it. And even, gods like Thor is in Dene Thor. It's like Danu Thor. Thor, the god of the Danu, the Tuatha Danu, as they're said to be. These are the Shea people. These are the Tuatha De Danann. This is the tribe of Anu, uh, as they're also known. This is also reflected in the Detanu in the assembly of gods in the Ugaritic text. This is the same group of giants that are being reflected in these names. So we won't spend all day on the names, but very creative in bringing these suffixes and things into names. And then you even mixes some languages of the Irish in there with Glafindel. Finn is a very important word as you take that back into the Irish mythology. As well as now you have L mixed. So he's mixing languages in there as well. But if you're getting a language out of the fairies, you would expect there'd be some of that mixed in there.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of. I mean, you've got hobbits, trolls, and there's the Nazgul. But the orcs, I mean, they're said to be sort of elves that have been tortured and like turned over to evil. Would you say that that's like fallen angels or?
Yeah, no, these orcs are something different.
Hmm.
And they could be representing some other kinds of beings that were also created by the falling angels. But they I mean they're almost like deformed giants
Right.
as an allegory. And so do we get a reflection for deformed kind of giants? Yeah, we do. We get you know, creatures that are like the ogres, which are kind of similar to the Cyclops and the Fomorians that all had, deformities to them in a single eye, and they seem to be of a different sort of strain. I think that's being reflected in there. And the white elves, which is when we talk about the elementals, there's four different groups of elementals in the occult, and they're all associated to elemental parts of the physical world, like air, wind, fire, for example. And elemental, as it's used in the Bible in Galatians and Colossians, it's associated in a different meaning there than with the basic elements of the world, where you'll also get the Greek word stoichion used. But as it's used, it's translated in the two books that I'm talking about as rudiments and as elementals, and these are the ones that enslave us. So inanimate objects aren't the enslavers. These are part of a group of beings it's referencing that's part of the hierarchy of the rebellious ones. And in the occult, the elementals have four groups, and there's three little groups of little ones, and then there's a larger group that's higher up called the salamanders, which is a reptilian group, which is taller than a human and probably about the same height as the original Nahash serpent. As the Gnostic said, the Nahash was as large as a camel. So and we don't know how many variations of that hash. So some of them could have had wings instead of just arms, right? As these reptilian beings. So that might have been part of the physical dragon versus the heavenly dragon of the seraphim, which are reflected in the pantheon of the gods with these serpentine gods, right? All around the world, whether or not it's the feathered serpent or the plume serpent or the Nagas, dragon creator gods, Arrayas gods like Osiris or Baal, as they're shown, was serpents with wings. Even the Greek ones were originally depicted as serpents in the beginning. So it's a common sort of understanding. And so when we look at these elementals, that's a higher group than the little ones. So the littlest ones, there's three groups, and they're at the bottom of the physical hierarchy. So you'll have three different groups, and people will recognize them um, as being ones that are like the mischievous ones as one of the groups. These are like, leprechauns or pixies or brownies or Menohe in Hawaii. And these are groups of beings that are on all continents all around the world. So if you get into First Nations in North America, they have these groups and they're associated with the giants as well and other creatures like Bigfoot and portals and caves and things like that. Then you have with the small ones, you have the little people or good looking ones, and they're going to be like Nereids, sprites, mermaids, nymphs, things like that. Um, and then you have ugly ones. And these are like the trolls. These are like the dwarves. These are like the hobbits. These are the goblins. And each of them have a specific role. So in the ugly ones, the dwarves were the ones that made the weapons for the demigods.
Hmm.
And they lived in the earth. So in Lord of the Rings, you see them in the mountains making these great weapons. Now you see those orcs doing that also at times and also being fighters. And so, again, they may be a degraded form of being that's being reflected there as well, or just a lower level of being. You also have the dark elves, versus the white elves. And dark ones, are like associated with Krampus and stuff like that, right? So these ones are kind of evil. I'll get to the white elves in a second because they're not part of the little ones. And so, but it's the gnomes which have all of the technology, genealogies, and knowledge that are very important in the fairy culture, and they look akin to the gray aliens, by the way, and they do the same things that the grays do, and they're the same size. So we have these kinds of beings that are showing up in Tolkien's um, version, and more from a Norse understanding, slightly different aspects to looks and things like that. So it's the white elves, though, that are different, and they're not little people. White elves are an allegory for the Shea people, Sidhe, the Sea people, the Sade, the Tuatha De Danann, and each of those groups have 100 different ways that they're pronounced in English and around the world in other languages. So don't get caught up on any one. And these are the fair folk. These were the shining beings, just as the giants were the shining beings. And I would encourage people to look at a modern version of a painting called The Riders of the Shade, The Riders of the Sidhe, Sidhes, and you see a lot of their imagery in there that reflects these Tuatha De Danann giants, who are the fairy folk. And these are the giants. And just as King Arthur and Guinevere are bloodlines of the Tuatha De Danann, and another mythopoetic style that came out with the Grail writing sponsored by the Templars in the Middle Ages. So this is a history of this kind of writing that's coming down with similar sort of allegories. And so when we look at the Tuatha De Danann, they're divided into a few different groups and locations, but typically the descriptions are red hair, hazel eyes. Some of them have blue eyes with red hair, and also blonde hair and blue eyes. And typically, the red hair variety is more associated with Wales and in Ireland and possibly Scotland. But the blonde haired ones who moved up the Danube River, likely named after the Tuatha De Danann, and moved into Germany, moved into Russia, moved into the Ukraine, moved into Norway. These are the blonde-haired ones, and the Norse understanding, which are reflected in the noble elves that are part of the description in the Lord of the Rings. And that word noble, um, when you look at the word Aryan, and the connection to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people that the people of National Socialist Worker Party in Germany used into their theology, going back to an Atlantean type of location or an island called Thule or Tula. These were blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans that they believed were giants, and that they believed their genealogies went back to that. And also understand in the Atlantean traditions, the giants before the flood were red-haired, hazel-eyed, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed of the same groupings. So they show up both before and after the flood. And I won't go through groups after the flood, but in book 2, I cover that off, even within the covenant land of the blonde-haired ones and the red-haired ones. But so understand that that's a reflection of this Tuatha De Danann, Lord of the Ring allegory that's going on. So you have the giants that are represented there, and they're kind of like set above. They're even looked above as higher than humans, right? They have this mystique about them that all of them pay that particular race some sort of admiration to that's shown in the Lord of the Rings, or at least that's what I'm seeing.
Deep stuff, this, Gary. One of the things that I did want to.
And one other thing while I'm on it, because I'll forget it. The Tuatha De Danann are the elven race, elf as in fairy, the elven race of the Shining Ones who have the dragon Magianic bloodline in that bloodline that's also mixed in. And also understand in Gnosticism that Antichrist will be an incarnation that happens in the end time.
Dragons just come up time and time again. I mean, for a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people know about the Welsh dragon, the red dragon, because it's on their flag.
Yeah,
But the actual English flag before we had the red cross with the white background was actually a red background with a white dragon, and the wyvern and
yeah.
the white dragon and the red dragon fought. And apparently they're buried under Snowdon now in Wales. But yeah, dragons keep coming up. But what I wanted to talk to you about a little bit was just to do with the symbolism, because one of the scenes in Lord of the Rings, I think it's in the Fellowship of the Ring, they come to sort of it's like a sort of doorway, but it's and they have to speak to it, but the actual doorway looks like the Freemasonic Royal Arch.
Yeah.
So again, this is, it's not a coincidence that it's in there.
No, it's not. And an arch in the secret societies is a portal.
Hmm.
And that it's like a looking glass or a mirror that's also allegorized into fairy tales where you can speak into that connection into another dimension and have communication. So it's kind of like what Tolkien might do to receive the language of the fairies and
Hmm.
create this language for his writings. I mean, there'd be this communication. So when we hear the occult adepts saying that they have regular communication with the celestial white masters, um, also known by 1,000 different names, spirit guides, possibly even aliens. It's all part of this rebellious hierarchy, both visible and invisible, that the adepts communicate with. So when you see them communicating with, that means these would be very high level of a blood type and knowledge to be able to make that type of communication. And of course, you have as part of the arch that's overseen in the Masonic tradition, they have two um, pillars there as well. And in their tradition, the knowledge of the antediluvian world was recorded and buried under the Great Pyramid in 9 vaults in 36,525 books. And because they didn't know whether or not there was a flood or destruction by fire coming, they prepared two pillars. One would survive a flood, one would survive a destruction by fire. So a fellow by the name of Harmenes, and they're called the pillars of Enoch, son of Cain, or the pillars of Lamech of the lineage of Cain, not of Jared. And there's each of those individuals in both lineages. So you have to be careful as you're discerning your way through this. And so this is the knowledge that Harmine finds and takes to Babel, to Nimrod, and puts this new religion over all of the surviving Noahites and imposes the antediluvian religion back on them. So when we look at these pillars and the arches, it's also part of the triptych architecture of the Masons, typically. So three of those arches. Those
Hmm.
are understood as three different portals. So if you look at the Da Vinci Code's Last Supper, you're going to see that triptych sort of architecture and a different image in each of those portal openings into a different dimension.
Hmm. The
Just
gate
just
that
to give
I'm
a little glimpse of to the
yeah.
meaning. Yeah.
Well, the actual part that I couldn't remember the name of it, but just a quick look. It's the gate, the Moria gate. So it's the scene where they get to this Moria gate, but one of or the Moriah, whatever they want to call it. But one of the part of this as well, this arch, is seven stars and a crown.
Yeah. Seven stars, seven angels.
Mm. And
Angels
and
st and seven wandering stars. So the
yeah.
allegories used both in the occult and in monotheism, but it's a constant.
Mm. And it's I was just looking at a picture of Aragorn's breastplate as well, because he got obviously the symbolism's all throughout, and there's like this white tree of Gondor, and again seven stars are on this Gondor flag, and then Aragorn's breastplate is apparently similar to the Masonic sunwing symbol.
Yeah, it's just endless. I mean, the amount of time you would have to do to imagine everything and include it, I mean, it has to have been sort of bred into him. But you have to credit him with being a master storyteller and a master artist just to squeeze all of this stuff in. But what you can't do is dismiss, in my opinion, I know people will, but what I would suggest you can't do is say that all of this imagery in every level, every aspect is part of the occult history and religion and pantheon of gods. That cannot be a coincidence. It's just everywhere. Everything they're doing is reflective of the belief system.
Yeah. I mean, apparently as well, Tolkien. I mean, we know that Tolkien was a Roman Catholic. That's not a secret. Like that's
Yep.
something that people can't say that's not true. Obviously, people say, well, he was a Christian. He was a Roman Catholic. I mean, I'm a former Roman Catholic, and I can tell you what the Roman Catholic Church is all about, and it's anti-Christian, and that's a fact. I've still got family members, obviously, in there, unfortunately. So, but apparently, now he had a friend, quote, who was a Jesuit. But the rumors are that Tolkien was also a Jesuit.
Um, as a Jesuit, he could be. I mean, he could choose his religious style any way that he would want within polytheism. It's not uncommon for Gnostics to mole into Christianity and put their imagery and doctrines and interpretive approach in play. They're there to lead people away from God.
Mm,
So the Jesuits, they interpret everything through the seven sacred sciences, which is the source for the mystical religion created by Enoch, son of Cain, that crossed the flood that we know as the daughters of Babylon throughout history. So they are not monotheists for sure. And they're there to create the new Babylon within the Roman Church. That's why they were created. I mean, it's a whole show on their own. But so when we look at getting back to Tolkien, the thing that I would say is does a Christian write so in depth about all of the history and the genealogies and the things that they worship? Does a Christian do that? But does it,
mm,
or would a Christian manifest more in their own belief system? And I think
yeah.
he was a mole. I know he's registered as a Catholic, but I look at the doctrines and this ideology of the eucatastrophe that Jesus would be the New Testament eucatastrophe, that he died, and the Bible is a fairy tale. I mean, those Christians wouldn't say that. Gnostics would.
Yeah.
And I think the most damning thing is that neither he nor Lewis ever recanted or denounced what they wrote.
Mm. Which is telling,
And
very
which is
telling.
very telling. If you had at some point converted, and both of them converted at some point, you
Mm,
would recant and you would just say,
of
you know what?
course.
I'm sorry I wrote that.
Yeah. Because ultimately it is. I mean, I've been reading an article by a gentleman who is quite well up on the symbology, but he even says that it led him to start looking into the occult, reading Lord of the Rings. So
Yeah,
this, I mean, this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, Gary, because it's not like I said earlier on. They're not just films. They're not just entertainment. There's a message behind them, and there's a purpose behind them. And it can't be a coincidence that Tolkien had all this knowledge. He had this language that he developed, and he could
yeah.
write in it. And there's this Freemasonic symbology. There's all these creatures, and ultimately, it's to turn people away from the Lord, from the gospel. That's as we know is the purpose.
It is, and the writing is so darn good. The story is so darn captivating that
Yeah,
it makes you want to learn and see more of it. And
yeah,
every half step you take is taking you away from God. Now, if you understand it for what they're communicating, and people should look up what mythopoetic means, it'll give you a good insight into what they're doing.
yeah,
Um, but if you can look at it and say, okay, I understand this is polytheism. I understand all of these things that they're communicating so that I can warn my children and educate them. As well. You can appreciate the story and say, but
Yeah.
understand this is more of a validation for what the Bible says, that these are the people that run the world, and that's their hierarchy that they're talking about. And that we were told that even Satan and his messengers can act as angels of light, and the occult looks at themselves as the children of light.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not telling people, don't get if you've got Lord of the Rings DVDs and books, throw them away. I mean, I've got the full series, I've got The Hobbit on my bookshelf, but you need to be well aware, and hopefully this has made people more aware of what's going on here. And like you said, it is a brilliant story. There's no doubt about it. But we need to see it for what it is. And like you said, tell your children, explain it to them and pray as well before you watch these films. But we can watch certain things. We just have to be careful. Well, Gary, as usual, you've brought the goods. It's brilliant stuff. I mean, we've touched on, you mentioned C.S. Lewis. I'd
Hmm.
love to talk to you about him sometime. And you've
Yep,
mentioned King Arthur,
yep.
and obviously that's relevant to the country I live in. And just incidentally, before I close this out, I've actually been to Camelot. It was a theme park 10 miles away from where I used to live.
Yeah,
It's no longer open anymore. But there you go, guys. I've been to Camelot, but I haven't been to
yep.
Middle Earth.
Yeah, well, just a little glint on Camelot. It's Camu-lot, and generally the meaning is like curved light, and so it would be sort of the allegory for a shining hill on a city, Camelot. And Washington was created as a shining hill on the city, but what the heck does that mean, right? Well,
Mm,
not only were the giants the shining ones, so that's going to be reflected in it. Shining and light is reflective of knowledge and light. And with the Gnostics, the two most important cities of light built on a hill or a fortress on a hill were the fortresses both before and after the flood of Sodom and Gomorrah. It has three other cities of the plain within the Pentapolis, and those were their cities of light. In the Gnostic understanding, is Gomorrah, where giants were created before the flood, and Sodom, where they were restarted after the flood. And these were great
mm.
cities of knowledge and rebellion against the evil God of the Bible. So understand we live in a world that they have painted, and every reference for the most part we have, unless it comes right out of the Bible, is going to be created by the elite.
Yeah.
And notice that word elite. They believe they're a superior class through genealogy and education and birthright and everything else, but they made the literature. They recorded
Mm.
the history. They set themselves up over humans in the first two classes, and they still run that system even to this day.
It's important to know that, guys.
Yeah.
It's
And elite
important to
has
know
the
that.
word yep. Elite has
Yeah,
the EL in there again. So they should have
exactly. Yeah,
they should have put Elim with the I am male plural, like
yeah.
Gibberim or Nephilim. But Ite is the words that's used for a lot of the giants
Mm.
in the Bible. But I am would be the better phrase because that was the international suffix in ancient ology for the majestic bloodline of the giants.
Well, we have many adversaries, and he has many tools, and one of them is films. Like I said, it's not neutral, but just be aware, guys. Gary's given us a lot of information tonight. It's brilliant stuff, and it's educational, and we want to just sort of give Christians tools to be able to defend themselves in this world and defend the faith as well, and see what these polytheists believe and how they propagate their beliefs. But just before we go, Gary, just let people know again where they can sort of connect with you, get hold of your books, all
Yeah.
the good stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And I will part on one little bit of tidbit for people. So at the end of The Lord of the Rings, you have this boat leaving with all these different creatures other than men on water. And what we're told it's the age of man, right? So they all disappear, and the flood is their allegory for the water is the allegory for the flood. And that's partially as an answer as to why we don't see some of these beings, even though they're still around and they still travel into this physical world. They're off to the other world, into another dimension. So all of that, I mean, it even ends on, I used to wonder before I started digging into this, what the heck was that all about? Why are they sailing
Mm,
off on a ship? What the heck does that mean? And so an imagery of that might be in the Egyptian religion where the dead kings, the dead pharaohs went to the other
mm,
world on these ships. So that's kind of the allegory. So it's
mm,
going to where the gods rule from, the other
mm.
world. Argatha, a thousand different names around the world also would know it as Sheol and Hades in the Bible. So where people can get a hold of me is best place is through my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the Genesis 6, the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book one, all 84 chapters of book two, and book two has been out not a year yet, but it continues to rank very high in places like history and or religious history, religious theology, things like that. And so very happy with that. And if you're like what you see, you can get a signed copy from me. And I do ship to the UK and all around the world off my international page. I have discounts for multiple books and a third page. If you want to buy one of each and get a signed copy, you get the discount off of that page. So look for 3 buy pages on there. There's links on my website over to the Kindle version of each of the copies and links over for the audio version. I will be getting Amazon here in the next couple of days to link wherever you are in the world. If you link over from my website, it's just going to go to your area of the world. Just make it a little bit easier if you want to buy from Amazon.
Great stuff. And if you can do, guys, I'd encourage you to buy direct from Gary. Um, I always try and steer people away from Amazon if I can, but if not, if you can, and get it anyway. And the Kindle version, I've got a Kindle version, and you can search for words, and that's one of the positives to that. But it's always good to have the physical copy as well. If this is the first time you've listened to this podcast and the first time you've heard Gary, I have 4 other episodes with Gary, and it's all brilliant stuff. The popular episodes. Gary's consistently popular on podcasting platforms and on YouTube and everything. So you'll learn a lot from them. So I'd encourage you to listen to them. So thanks again, Gary. It's been brilliant again talking to you. Guys, I'm going to be back next week with a new guest. I'm Paul, and this is Beyond the Paradigm.